Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Women in Healthcare podcast with Medical Group Management Association. My name is Adrienne Lloyd, and I am your host, and I'm very happy to be here today with Kripa Krishnan, who I have known for, 15 years or so now.
I think more than that.
Maybe more.
Yes.
And we are very happy to have Kripa with us today. So she and I first worked together when we were at Mayo Clinic, and she is currently an executive role at Northwestern Medical Center in Chicago, where she has been there for a while. And Kripa, just thank you so much for being here. I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit more about your journey so far.
Thanks, Adrienne. Thanks for having me. It's my first podcast, so
Hey, fantastic. We'll go easy on you.
Please do. So happy to be here. Just a little bit about myself. So yes, I'm currently a vice president of operations at Northwestern Memorial Healthcare in Chicago, Illinois. I started my, healthcare journey actually in college, kind of finding out about public health and pivoting at that time from a pre-med track to sort of exploring more of the public health realm, thinking about how, careers in which, there's an opportunity to really affect the health of communities and populations on a large scale. After college, I did an internship program, Health Careers Connection, which I'm actually still involved with. I actually take interns now out of that program, but connected with Kaiser Permanente in Northern California, and just really kind of set me in a trajectory of healthcare administration. So I did my master's at Columbia University. It's Master's of Public Health in Healthcare Administration and Policy. Did my administrative fellowship at Mayo Clinic based in Arizona. After the fellowship, worked in medicine and surgical areas. And then for largely driven by personal reasons, wanted to relocate to Chicago, got connected to leaders at Northwestern, started my career there about 10 years ago. As a director and division administrator, kind of blending most kind of the clinical operations side with the academic operations side, similar to what I was doing at Mayo Clinic. Have had great opportunities at Northwestern to sort of explore more of the clinical operations, more of the academic operations space. Now in my current role, have accountability for the Department of Medicine, so all the specialties within medicine in terms of the academic, research, education, and faculty affairs portfolio. And then from the clinical operations side, much of the clinical areas that don't otherwise roll into a service line, although I do have the digestive health service line, medical specialties, general internal medicine, and geriatrics. And then we're opening up a new multi-specialty site in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, and that will also be part of my operations portfolio. So excited.
Congratulations. It's a lot. Yes.
I should say, and it again sounds like a lot, but as you know, it's a team. It's always a team effort, and I'm only as good as all of the people I work with. So
I know. Well, they're lucky to have you. But I'd love to start off. You and I were able to have a conversation kind of before we jumped on live. And we talked about really sponsorship and mentorship and just overall, obviously, your career has evolved as, very successfully, and you have a very large role. But could you tell us a little bit your thoughts on the importance of sponsorship over mentorship, particularly around helping your career in advance? And is maybe there a time when having a sponsor made a big difference for you throughout your career?
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you asking the question, because I think I do try to talk to, health leaders and those who've reached out to me about this, because I think we talk a lot about mentorship, and I think there's a good understanding about what that means, and could range from, I just get coffee with you once in a while, or I ping you for advice. But I do try to talk to people about the difference between that and sponsorship, because a sponsor is really someone, to me, who knows your work, who kind of knows your strengths and your skills, and importantly, is going to be saying your name in the room when you're not there, right? So really helping to the best advocates for your work is not in your, value, um, are other people. And those don't necessarily have to be folks who are in leadership roles or a higher level job title. Can be the people in your network too, to say like, you know, Adrienne is kind of the best operator I've ever worked with, and
Yeah.
and that can really go a long way. And I think that sometimes people confuse the two, because I do think there's a lot of people that I meet with, and they'll reach out and say, "Well, I'm applying for this job," and I think that's great, and I think I can certainly give folks my opinion about what kind of the job is and how to sort of position yourself. But when it comes to, advocating for that person to get that job or that next level role, that's where you really need a sponsor. You need the people who kind of know your work. And so for me, I, credit a lot of the opportunities I've had to the sponsors in my career, again, and those have been the people I've worked for, like you and others, because they've, again, at a base level, and I do tell this to everyone, you have to be focused on your job and be good at what
Right.
you do. And then those are, the folks that you work with and for are going to kind of say your name in the role. And it's kind of a long-winded answer. We can
Oh,
edit
you're
it down.
good.
But I do think, the other piece of this is, I hear a lot of newer leaders wanting exposure, and I have a complicated a relationship with that
Relationship with it.
word, because I think exposure doesn't necessarily mean you have to be at the front of the room presenting, doing all those things. I think exposure can come through your sponsors too.
Right.
And, I you may not be in meetings or in conversations with the CEO, but your sponsors might, and they're the ones who are going to be saying your name to the CEO. And that's kind of where the 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 power of sponsors helps you gain that exposure. And I think it's sort of double Xing, your
Right.
exposure, if you will, because it's
Yeah.
someone else praising you.
Right. Well, and I think just to kind of go off on the exposure tangent, I agree. I think that's where whatever generation people are or aren't, I don't necessarily dial into classifying in that way. But I do think that, and you and I both went through the fellowship at Mayo, and I know many other colleagues who've gone through fellowships or residencies after, or their members, or even during their master's programs for internships and so forth. And what was great about some of those programs was being able to be at the bigger tables. And I know it sometimes almost felt like a kind of takeaway as you shifted into the regular roles where you weren't then engaged. But I think exposure can be, just as you said, learning from those who are in the rooms for those conversations. And other times it's, finding those maybe not so glamorous roles or ways that you can participate at in those initiatives or other things that are valuable to the organization, perhaps outside of what you're doing. But it might not be as a lead. It may be as a, hey, can I help you as a project manager? Can I help with a subgroup committee task force initiative? And I think some of those things too are great conversations to have with a sponsor or mentor along the way. Um,
Yeah, and I think, mentors can become sponsors, and it's not,
yeah,
I don't think it's
sure.
a purely binary thing. And I agree with you. This is a lot of what I talk to fellows about as they're leaving the fellowship. And even in early career, it's it's just as important, I think, and maybe even more so depending on the situation of who you're working with and potentially for, early in your career, rather than the title or the exact job description, because there's always going to be, and we know this for people who have been on our teams or we've worked with, really great, people who are really great at their jobs. There's lots of opportunity and bandwidth within a certain job description to get more involved or do other things or start to grow. And, the right leaders can help you do that in the job that you have and help set you up for the next thing.
Yeah,
So, I don't think there has to be preference to have to be in operations
Right.
versus like, I've met CEOs who started in HR, and it's all about kind of, I think, the experience, doing well at what you do, and connecting with kind of the right people.
Absolutely. What advice would you give women in healthcare or other, or yeah, I know we have some male audience too, as this sometimes will cross post to the leadership podcast as well. But what advice would you give in general for people who are looking for sponsorship in their organizations or beyond?
Yeah, I think I don't want to sound too much like repeating, but like at the base level, you really have to focus on the job that you have and doing well at what you do. That's a little bit my ethos too. I'm not necessarily, or haven't necessarily been a self promoter, but I think good work speaks for itself to some extent, and that's not discounting the fact that networking and doing all of
Yeah.
those things can also be pretty critical depending on your situation. But I think that um, you know, for women leaders, really going out and seeing in your organization or even outside of your organization, who do you admire, who would you like to who kind of represents maybe some of your own leadership ethos or
Yeah.
style. So I do think that, but I also think too, reaching out to male leaders and maybe leaders who you would like to emulate as well is a good opportunity. I do think sometimes you can get caught in a trap of, maybe trap's not the right word, but reaching females reaching out to females and males are reaching out to males, and then we're sort of potentially perpetuating a cycle that that doesn't help any of us. So I think that all of that is important to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's really finding people that you connect with too, and whether you connect on work or the role that they have, there might be something that you want or something that you're interested in. It may also be someone who you really just feel commonality with. And but I agree. I think continuing to really find others outside your direct role that you connect with and can help give you a different perspective is so key.
And I think having them introduce you to, because again, like, if there is a leader that you connect with well, and I'm still, I think, trying to do this as myself, but ask them, who do you think I should connect with?
Right.
Because they can also have some really good insight into what avenues you might want to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things as we talked about kind of before, one of the things we talked about was just being an authentic leader and like really anchoring into, as you said, how you want to lead, your leadership style and what feels. Obviously, we will all want to continue to evolve our leadership style and get better and be more adaptable and all of those things. But like what feels, that leadership style and authentic style that really feels true to you and who you are and how you know that you can kind of serve. And you've held some really prestigious roles across Northwestern and medicine and Mayo Clinic. How have you navigated being an authentic leader while really with these various organizational cultures? And I'm sure Northwestern looks even different today than it did when you started 10 years ago. So how have you navigated those shifts?
It's certainly been a work in progress, I think, and I have built confidence over the years in settling into what my strengths are as a leader, as opposed to trying to emulate maybe a stereotypical, or what I thought was a stereotypical version of what a leader should be. I'm by nature an introvert. I am an analytic person. I, for a long time, thought that I needed to sort of balance that by being too much in one or the other direction. And I think over time, realized that yes, like all of us, we have our communication styles and personality types that we're most comfortable in. And we have to start to adapt when we're working with different teams and different individuals. But ultimately, the things that will give you more confidence and
Yeah,
also show your value within your role or to the organization is when you lean into those strengths. And so, um,
yeah,
I think that that's really been kind of a learning progress for me. And I haven't always been the best sort of impromptu speaker, or that's one of the areas I have to practice
Yeah.
clarity and brevity in my presentations and my answers. And hopefully I'm doing that okay on this podcast.
Great.
But we'll see after it's done. But then I know I'm very good in my writing abilities. And I'm a good writer, and I do my best communication through writing. So then you start to lean into that. So after the meeting, if I feel like I didn't make my point or communicate more clearly, I can send a follow-up note. I have a little bit more time. I have a way to kind of thoughtfully craft what I need to craft
Yeah.
and do that. And so, or I'll try to figure out ways where I can either before the meeting or after the meeting really double down on my point, in that in the communication style that I'm most comfortable or know that I'm strong at. Which of course doesn't mean I'm not constantly working on those other areas, but those are, I think, some ways that you can help to like build that confidence and then also continue to contribute and provide value.
No, I love that, and I think that's one of the things I've probably talked on the podcast over time too about, but that was really helpful for me where I feel like I'm really great in conversation, one-on-one, even presentations, although I get nervous and I do need to have, um, kind of information organized in a way I'm going to be able to speak to it so that my brain can follow itself. But writing is something that I initially just really I knew it always was something that took me more mental energy, it would take me more time. I procrastinated the heck out of it.
Mhm.
And so finding, I know when you and I first started working together and you were like, I really love the writing piece. It was like, okay, fine, fantastic. Could you draft X, Y, or Z communication? And then we can walk through it because it's easier for me to respond to something and edit. And I
Mhm.
think that's too, as leaders, we can often take on trying to be everything to everyone, and be great at everything. And there is a base level, as you said, of like, you've got to be a strong enough presenter, depending on
Mhm.
in the roles that you have, of course, you've got to be able to get your point across in these meetings, but also recognizing that you can complement that in another way so that there's not as much stress that you're placing on yourself in those, confined moments of the presentation to for that to be like, okay, if I don't get this right, then the project's not going to go through, somebody's going to get offended. There's a way to kind of counter that with those pieces, and I love that that's something that you've kinda navigated into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I think I like the point you brought up too, that lean on your teams and your colleagues, because I think again, it's everything we do is a team sport, and that's where if you know well where your team's strengths are, you can help lean on look to the right people and lean on their strengths to do those types of things. So
No,
that's good.
I agree. One of the things that I know you mentioned the introverted leader, and I think I'm like right on the introverted extroverted side, probably more I than E sometimes, but um, I think it's hard at both feeling that way, feeling introverted, feeling also female, feeling kind of on the younger side, at least when we all both started in the healthcare industry, maybe
Oh,
not as
me that.
much now, not as much now, but 20 plus years later, here we are. But um, what did you find was really helpful in developing your executive presence, or what are some thoughts that you would recommend for, new leaders or leaders who are moving in maybe mid-career, but moving into new roles, like, and kind of shifting, and wanting to increase how they're perceived and how they're able to create an impact in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's multifactorial. Certainly, what I talked about before about leaning into your strengths is important because it helps build confidence. I think as introverted leaders, and whether this is a particular female trait or not, I mean, and we know some of the research shows that for example, going for that job, women tend not to go for the job unless they check all the boxes of
Requirements, right?
and men tend to shoot their shot on, well,
One.
maybe not, but I'll take a swing. And I think that's one area too. There's basically no job that I've taken that was the kind of next level up. I personally felt I was ready for. But I had, the sponsors and mentors around me that said, go for it and gave me that guidance. And I think having those cheerleaders, not just in the professional realm, but also in the personal realm,
Yeah.
to really help kind of help you have a different view of yourself than you might. And I think and this might also be kind of a talking about generational thing, millennial thing. I'm a
Mm.
whatever older millennial. And I'm very much a feedback person. So I think that also helps me talk to people and say, what do you think my strengths are? How do you, like, what am I doing well? And that can also give you insights that you wouldn't potentially give yourself. And then I think as you grow in your career, you get more confident. Certainly, I had in understanding what those are, and again, kind of like leaning into those.
Yeah. I know, I agree, and, I often think of I'm not even gonna try to say who said it, but, the old, that we are kind of the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with,
Mhm.
and I think
Right.
that really is true, and that's something that try to do from time to time too, and for me, I have friends all over the country, so it's not necessarily those people I get to spend the most time with, but, like, about those people like, if I think about the next level and where I wanna be in my career, in my life, looking around and saying, do I have people that are exhibiting those traits, that are doing those things that I can go to not only for input, support, advice, but also inspiration. And I think that's something as you're moving through your leadership career, through your career in healthcare too, who do you want to kind of pull into your world or move into their world so that you're kind of absorbing some of either their knowledge or energy insights and so
Mhm.
forth. I think that really, makes a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting just thinking about because I know your question was about developing executive
Right.
presence, and I think I have a. It was good. I was just thinking about because I was like, did I answer that question?
You just
I feel like I also have a complicated relationship with the term executive presence
mm,
because very early on in my career, I know like one of the areas of my evaluations for opportunity for improvement basically was this idea of you work on your executive presence. And there's
yeah,
some there, I understand some of that in terms of I was very quiet, not to say I'm still not quiet, but
yeah,
in some avenues. But I do think sometimes it's coded for female leaders, it's coded on, you don't look the right way, you don't sound the right way, you're not as
doing the right thing.
forceful,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
not the right thing. And that's where I try to balance a little bit. And
yeah,
of course, like all things, it's not a blanket statement, but I do kind of think always want to make sure I and am encouraging others to more thoughtfully
I love that.
analyze feedback around executive presence when that's given as kind of a area for improvement.
I'm getting like a set of images flashing through my mind, right, when you hear the word executive presence, and I agree, like, what I 20 years ago, kind of brand new to the industry, to the role, you hear that word and having been in somewhat formal organizations in my career too, there's a whole like physical appearance, right, for the
For sure.
executive presence that, and there's a gender and age classification that at least initially would have come to my mind when I thought about those things, and now um, the images that flash through my mind are the range of executive leaders that I know in all shapes, colors, and sizes, presenting and handling themselves in so many different ways, and I think that's I love that. Like, how do we define executive presence? And it's really should be the impact and connection with your teams and influence, not anything beyond that. So,
Yeah, and I think almost ironically, you see those visions
mhm,
flash what it should be, but then ironically, you have more executive presence if you lean more into your own authentic leadership.
yeah,
Like that's actually what gives you
right.
executive presence. So it's again a counterintuitive type of idea, but
No, I think it is. I think if the parts I love about executive presence, I think, are that ability to kind of hold the space for various thoughts, being calm in chaos, being able to unify the team around the goals and navigate through the different perspectives to the like core root of the issue or the core direction forward. And I think that's the more that you are able to center yourself and understand yourself and how you can and want to function as a leader, I think the easier it is for that to happen. So, and I know one of the other things we talked about was being a woman of color in the executive leadership. What are some of the barriers that you've encountered, and what advice might you give for other kind of women of color navigating the complexities of leadership in healthcare?
Yeah, and I think it's an and I occupy, I think, an interesting space too, because I'm South Asian, and in the healthcare space, I'm more likely to be mistaken for a physician than something else. And I and other, women of color who are not South Asian, and we've both talked with and are friends with many women leaders who, to be mistaken for something else, that's not as potentially,
Glamorous, isn't
harmful
it? Yeah.
as being mistaken for a physician is different. So I am cognizant that there's inherent privilege within this category of women of color that I occupy. That said, I have not been immune to some of the barriers that exist. I've had many, I shouldn't say many, I've had experiences that uh, have made me think about whether it's my job to make the other person comfortable with what they just said, or keep them
Mhm.
uncomfortable if they've made a comment about. I think I told you about a situation that we were, I think, talking about at the time, um, offshoring opportunities for, I can't even remember what the aspect of it was, scheduling or call center or something. And an individual in that meeting looked at me or I think someone said, like, oh, they do this in India now. And then someone looked over at me and said, Kripa, do you know anyone? Which I think was meant to be a joke. Clearly, it was very uncomfortable. And I think in the moment I had to to figure out what I had to do, instead of, or in terms of laugh it off,
Mhm.
which helps the other person feel more comfortable, but that doesn't quite
It's
have the
authentic.
impact of helping them understand that that was not an appropriate comment. So in the moment, I was quiet, but I didn't laugh. And, you know, given I think his facial expressions, he sort of got that was not that made me uncomfortable, and I think made everyone in the room uncomfortable. I think it's the same sort of theory around, like, or the process around microaggressions and just things that that we have to navigate, whether you're a leader or not. But certainly it becomes a little bit more difficult when you're a leader and it's coming from other senior leaders that are in charge of your sort of fate, um, or otherwise. And so I think, like, talking about it is useful. I think with having a group of individuals that you can process through these things, and thinking about, like, how you conduct yourself in those situations is a bit of a fraught topic, but I think it's something that I always encourage people to be prepared for, certainly.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's, yeah, having a group that you talk to and be like, "This happened. Don't even know how to feel about it," right? I don't know how to feel about this, and having those sounding boards to help you talk through it, think through it, and know what or if you need to do differently,
Some of, like, and
respond.
again, to not to always, show both sides, but to, let me rephrase that. Um, I think also, I've had experiences in my career where, again, some of my sponsors who've been white men have been great advocates
Yeah.
for me, and stepped in a way I didn't have to. I think there was a vendor once that reached out, and it was a very odd statement, but the email said something like, what can a guy like me do for a woman like you? And like, it was some vendor thing, and I was, half joking, but half like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I remember my VP at the time got very, basically made sure, that that vendor was kind of appropriately counseled, and then basically we're either not going to deal with you particularly
Yeah.
or
The
your
company.
company again. And so, those are the kinds of things that make me feel that help us feel supported, and we should all
Yeah.
be doing for our teams for sure.
I agree. I agree. I think those are so important. Um, what one of the other things we talked about, and you and I both grew up with so I often say I grew up at Mayo, if it feels that way, but um,
They say that a
really
lot.
working with physicians, which was one of the things I truly adored about all the careers that I've had. But is that physician partnership, but it was just such a strong kind of presence at Mayo. But what as you've kind of navigated some of those more challenging conversations or even potentially challenging partnerships with physicians or otherwise, but I do feel like connecting with our physician colleagues is, often a different conversation or nuance to that conversations as we're partnering with them. What have you found to be the most helpful in those conversations and relationships in general?
Yeah, I think the longer I've kind of been in the space, the better and or I think the better we all get at sort of understanding where people are coming from. So that's not just kind of what their own ethos is, but also, their strengths, their, areas for opportunity. We get better at knowing that about ourselves, but also others. And I think that's one of the key opportunity areas when you're an administrator in kind of a physician administrative partnership dyad, because it's kind of recognizing what everyone brings to the table. And, over the years, you and I, we've worked with all different people, all different physician leaders, and all different. One of those are different people, so they'll have their communication styles, their their preferred way of doing things. And I think as administrators, we have to kind of understand how to dial up or dial down certain aspects of our
Yeah.
personality or skill set to help bring that kind of balance to that partnership. So I've worked with physician leaders who really don't like to have difficult conversations. It's just an uncomfortable space for them.
Yeah.
And, then I've had to sort of be the one to come in and kind of give the hard news or be direct on behalf of that physician leader and vice versa. I've worked with, leaders who will run towards conflict because they really
Yeah.
like to be
Let it
kind of
out. Yeah.
in that, then my role is a little bit coming in and being the sort of softer, soothe
Why
things.
we need to shift and this is yeah.
Yes. And I
Thank
think that's like, again, not, and this is just like at this point in our career, how many of these like personality tests have we done, right? Like what's your communication style? What's your personality? You learn that there's not right or wrong communication styles or personality styles. It's just what the situation calls for.
yeah.
And kind of that's actually where I think some of the huge opportunities and power comes in with dyads is because you have that much more, you know, um, that much more tools in the tool chest, if you will, to kind of be able to get things done.
No, I love that. That was goes into something that we had talked about too, just really balancing being empathetic while making those tough decisions in challenging environments. And really, I think anchoring that in, as you said, to your personality and those conflict management styles and recognizing that back to others. And I so appreciate you coming today. Let's kind of wrap everything up as you look back over your career, your journey. Is there any piece of advice that you wish you would have received maybe earlier on, or is there any takeaway that you'd like to leave the listeners with as they navigate their own paths?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like maybe I've covered it already, so not to sort of repeat
Summarize.
myself. But ultimately, I do think early in your career, if I were to look back at myself and to talk to myself, I hate to say it will all work out because I do think that,
Mm,
especially if you're in a fellowship and coming out of a fellowship, it's like I always tell fellows that, because you're always worried about that first job. And I think I remember you actually telling me this because I was so worried about my first job, and you're like, it'll all work out.
yeah.
And I didn't believe you, and everyone I talk to, they don't believe me either, and then it all works out. But I do
Yeah.
think that's true for careers too, where ultimately, stay grounded, be good at the
Mm,
job you're doing, do your best at the role you're doing, be confident, be confident in your own authentic leadership style and where your
yeah.
strengths are. Find those people who are going to be in your corner, and that you can, learn from and help support. And hopefully they will support you in your career too.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's just such pressure, and not only at early career, I think throughout our careers, we place such pressure on ourselves around um, who and what we will or will become. And I think when we can, anchor into what feels true for us today and what we want maybe tomorrow or 3 tomorrows from now, but not having to put such pressure on the final product, the final outcome. It just allows space for us to kind of navigate the world that is healthcare,
Mhm.
chaos, and change. And
Yeah, and there's a balance. Like, I don't want to
yeah,
say just be great in your job and there's no, don't take charge of your destiny. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is like you're constantly networking and trying to make relationships, but that you lose focus on your own job. And
yeah,
both things are not, you have to find that happy kind of medium, I think.
yeah. And the intentionality, focus, and yes, putting in the effort, creating those connections and sponsors. I think that's some great tidbits. And so I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being with us today. And maybe we'll have you back one day as we
Yeah.
navigate these other topics. But I really appreciate it, Kripa.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a fun experience. I hope it turns out
You
okay.
survived. First
I'm glad I
podcast
did. I did.
and many more. So
Well, and I thank you because you've been a mentor and a sponsor in my career, and a good friend. And you're my hashtag goals too. So
oh, thank
from a
you.
career perspective. So
It's easy to be sponsors when you've got people who are working really, really hard and doing the right things as they grow. So
thanks for having me. It was fun.
absolutely. Thank you so much.